Welcome back to part 2 of our series where we're going to be building a website with HTML and CSS. Now in the first video we got up to this point just here, so this was the code we had, and our progress was to start making the header and navigation section over here, so we're building this website that we have here. So in this video we're going to be adding our drop down menus and styling the rest of our header before moving on to beginning the hero section just down here. So we have this text, this button, and this these selection of images in this layout. So first we're going to work on our navigation, and just to point out, if you haven't seen the first video, you can find a link in the description, or if you want to carry on from just this video, you can find a link to the source code that we left off at the end of the first video. But let's get started. So the first thing we want to do in Atom is make it so that when you hover over these items, the actual drop-down content can appear. So we can start by going up to our CSS, and we're going to just say drop-down, hover, and then after this we want the drop-down content to display. We're also going to say position absolute. So if we save this now and go back to our page and hover these items, you can see that our drop-down content is actually appearing. So now that we have that, we're going to add some styling to these sections as well. So first, let's just go over to the existing site we're looking at. We want to take a few bits of information from this site. So the main things we need to look for is what font is being used just here. So it looks like there's possibly two different fonts in action. So we're going to focus on these ones first. So using the developer tools, you can click on this computed tab just here and then type in font family, and you can find out what font is being used. And if you click just here, it will take you to that part of the CSS, so just here. So you can copy this and then go back to our page just here. So what we would need to do is, if we look in our page just here, we can see this is all being set from nav, menu drop downs, and then A, which is for a link. Now what we're using at the moment is padding, but we want to change everywhere where we're using padding to be margins instead. So we'll start by doing this for our menu links. So here is the padding just here. So we'll set our font family, we'll remove this font first, and then we're going to change all of these to be margin. Like that. And if we save and refresh, we can see we have this updated font display now. Now the next thing we need to do is remove this text underline just here and set a font color. So let's look at what font color is being used. Okay, we can see it's this color just here. So again, we'll just take that and set it. And to remove the underline, you just say text decoration and set it to none. So if we look, this should now be updated. Yep. Now they have a few slight differences in the way their text is displayed, you can see here. So if we scroll down, you can have a look. See this item just here smooths out the display of the font. So we want to go ahead and add this to our body up here. Now this is just a new property in CSS. It doesn't work on all browsers, but for most browsers you will find a difference, and it just slightly smoothens out the display of your text. So if we go back to our page now and refresh, you can see a slight difference in the display. So next we need to work on the display of our buttons over here. Now they are shown in a slightly different way. You can see they're capitalized, and these are more buttons than links. So let's jump in first and add a set of styling for all of the parts of these elements that are the same. So it looks like the padding around here is the same, and they're both buttons, they have a background color, and they're both made into capital letters. So we'll create that first. So we'll go down to where we have these buttons, and we'll say class top button. Like this. So we now need to create this class. So we want to add padding of 5 pixels and 10 pixels. We want to make the font size smaller, around 10 pixels. And we want to make the text capitalized, so you can use that text transform property and change it to capitalize. So let's just take a look at what we have. Maybe we want slightly larger text than this, but we also want to change the font being used as well. So we'll use this other font up here. We also want to remove the text decoration, like that. So yeah, the font needs to be slightly larger than this. But you might also notice that the alignment here between these right buttons and this element for our drop downs is slightly off. So if we highlight this, you can see, so we have our nav. So if we click onto this and do align items center, this fixes this display issue slightly. So we need to add this to our nav. So if we go up here and add this there, what you'll notice with CSS is that we have a lot of changes, then we test it and check the display. If you do too much code without checking, there could be some slight mistake or some color that just doesn't look right. So when it comes to CSS, you need to constantly be testing what you're working on and look at it regularly. So we also need to make sure this is displayed as inline block. So we'll save this. So we can see this changes the position of our elements. This should actually have been uppercase, sorry, not capitalize, as you can see. So next we need to add a little bit of spacing between the letters and change the weight of this font. So as you can see, if we go into this display point, if we go into developer tools, and we can set these parameters. So the first one will be the weight of the font. So set that as bold, and then letter spacing, we'll add some spacing between the letters. So I think 1.5 pixels should be enough. So we'll add these to our style. And then we need to create 2 separate classes to add the different colors to each of these elements. So one will be white button and the other will be green button. So if we look at our example site here, we need to make sure that we get these 2 colors. So here is the green button. So this is the color they're using. So we'll just say background color, and then there's the green color, and their font color is white, which you can use FFF for white. And we're also going to add a border width of 2 pixels, and the same thing over here, border width 2 pixels, but the background color will be white. And we need to check what color gray they're using over here. So this is the color, so we'll set that as well. We need to actually assign these classes to our buttons. So we'll scroll down, add white button and green button. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is if we take a look at how these compare, the spacing isn't too bad, but we need to add a bit more height to our buttons, and we need to curve the corner of the buttons. So first we'll go up and add this curve just here, so that is called border radius, and maybe 4 pixels for that. And then we need to adjust the padding slightly, so we want to add a bit more padding here and a bit more padding here. So it's almost what we're looking for, but we need to add just a little bit more height there. So if we take a look in the developer tools again, perhaps 10 and 13, 10 and 15, that looks about right. So 15 and 10. So if we refresh what we have, there we go. So if we have a close look again, we can see that this first button has a slight shadow behind it. So if we take a look again at their example, this is the shadow. So we'll just copy this for now and I'll explain exactly what this shadow code means. So the reason they have 2 attributes here that look very, very similar is because different browsers need slightly different CSS properties. So this WebKit one will mostly be for Safari and Chrome, and this box shadow one supports more browsers essentially. But the actual properties are identical. So this area here first adds a shadow inside, and then there's a comma, which means they're adding an extra CSS shadow as well. So there's two shadows that are being applied. If we just save this and refresh, you can see now that this has been applied to our element. So the next thing we need to do is add our borders. Now you can see this one, add our hover event, sorry. So this one here just adds a border around, and this one changes the color of the bottom part of the border. So if we have a look over here, I'll show an example of what this means. So if we were to say border bottom 2 pixels solid red, maybe 3 pixels, you can see it adds that curve around the side there. So we need to make sure that this property isn't changing the height of our box. So what we would do is make sure that where we have our border width down here, we're also setting a border color that is the same color as our background. So if we go up here and set a border color of our background color and add a border style of solid, you can see now when we add this element up here, so if we remove it and then add it, it's not changing the height of the page. So we'll copy this down here and add this to our green button, and we need to do exactly the same thing for our white button, but this border needs to be all the way around. So as down here we can say, so we now have border width, border color and border style. But you can actually condense these down into one property. So you can say 2 pixels solid and then set your color that you want this to be, and it will have exactly the same effect. And then for our hover effect, we'll just say hover, and then we want to change the border bottom to be a dark green, but we'll change the exact color in a moment. And then up here we want to do the same sort of things. We're going to say border 2 pixels solid and white, and then on hover we'll say border color grey. So again we'll tweak that color in a moment, but if we refresh and have a look, when we hover we get this effect just here. But this is where we need to make sure that we're using the right color. So if we go over here and just change the background color slightly, there should be enough of a change. So if we change the dark green to this, we could just change the border bottom color like that. So you can now see that effect. And then for login, this is very similar. So this navigation bar is almost complete, but we just need to make a couple more changes. You see where we hover over this area here, it's quite jumpy compared to the example here where this animation is quite smooth, like it almost animates the border change. So we're going to add a bit of CSS that will smoothen this transition, and we're going to slightly make the border around the login button a little bit lighter, like this one here. As you can see, our one is a little bit darker. So we'll just lighten that up and add a slight transition to this. So to add this transition in our top button class, we're going to add the CSS property called transition, and then you just put in a number. So this is 0.4 and then S for seconds, and this is how long it will take to smoothen out that animation or the change of property. So if we refresh now and have a look, you can see now that it gently moves this change onto the page. And now we'll just tweak the border color for our login button. So another useful thing in the developer tools, if you right click on your element, you can force it to display as a hovered item. So then you can see quickly what color you have here. So if we just pick one down here and then just grab this new color and add that down here. So one more thing before we move on to the hero section, and we will get to these drop-down content display later, but first we're just going to add a little image next to these drop-downs. So to do this, we'll go back to the example site again and borrow their image for now. So as you can see, this is the image just here, so we'll double click on that, copy the source, and then go back into Atom. And next to each of these, we'll add an image tag with this source. and then we just copy and paste it. So if we take a look at what we have now, that looks a bit nicer. So we just need to add it to our Explore. There we go. So if we compare these two now, it matches that design much more. So later on in the series, we'll add display for the actual drop-downs. So the next part of this video, we're going to look at the hero section. So we're going to add the base display for these elements. So we need a bit of heading text just here, a button, and a place that we can add this display down here. We're going to do this underneath the header in a new section. And at the top, we will have a div, which will be called hero. And then inside here, we're going to place an H1, so a heading. So we'll say this is our heading text. And then underneath this, we want a button, which you create like that. And this will be called Get Started. I think that's the same text that they use. Yep. So if we refresh this now, you can see that this is definitely not what we want, but this is the text that we want to display. We could just use that same text for now to keep it consistent. And then behind this, we're going to add another div called Images Display. And this is where we're going to have all of these images down here. So if we zoom out, we can get an idea of how many rows that we need. So there's 1, 2, 3, there's 17 rows in total, and they have a variation of numbers of images. So some have 3, some have 2, some have 1. So what we're going to do is create a separate div for each of these 17 rows, and then we'll start to display the images inside this after. So we'll create a div class here called ImageCol, and we need 17. Okay, so here are our 17 image columns. So if we save and refresh our page, we can see that they're displayed here. Now in the next part of this series, we're going to go through setting up this hero section just here with our image columns and center this text and display it to be similar to our button over here. So join me in the next part of this series, and that's what we'll be creating next.